Hello and welcome back. Welcome to the Best Places to Work Awards 2020, part of the GamesIndustry.biz live series of events. This is our special awards event celebrating the top video games employers in the UK games industry. We'll be revealing the winners at 4 p.m. This evening. Before that, though, we've got an amazing lineup of talks for you. We have discussions on diversity and how the games industry can do better in improving inclusivity in the business. We have a panel on coronavirus and COVID-19 and how it might impact the video games workplace in the future. And we have an amazing, please do check this, fireside chat with Siobhan Reddy, the Media Molecule Studio Director, who was last year's UK Best Boss winner. But before that, we've got another great opening talk from Shahneila Saeed on how the games industry should work with education to help improve the diversity of the business. So enough from me, over to you, Shahneila.
Oh, hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and speak to you all. I'm just going to start. I have a presentation to share, so I'm just going to start this, and hopefully you will be able to see this now. So it's a pleasure to be here today and talk to you about how we can support diversity within our industry, but looking at it with a lens through education. And I thought, to be honest, before I sort of dive into my insights and opinions, I'd give you a bit of a background as to myself and where I'm from, and just to put things into a little bit of context. So I've spent, before joining Yuki, I was a computing teacher, and I did it for a very long time, closer to 20 if you count my year as an trainee teacher and the voluntary work I did. But one of the things that I did as head of department was I sought to improve the provision of computing within the school, and did a lot of experimentation and exploration, and the result of which was that we had embedded a computer science curriculum across all ages, 5 years ahead of the government changes. That meant that we were in a lot of conversations, no doubt, and be able to share our expertise at sort of grassroots level, and be part of that conversation with organisations such as Computing at School and the Royal Society when they were lobbying government for change. And we were the evidence that they pulled out that it's possible. I left teaching to join Yuki for the exciting role of bringing the Digital Schoolhouse programme to life. It's been an amazing journey with Digital Schoolhouse, but I'm not here to talk about all the things that are Digital Schoolhouse per se, so I will stop that. But if anyone's interested, I'm happy to have a conversation with you about that later. But in my wider role as head of education for Yuki, one of the things that I've been responsible for doing is bringing together all of our education initiatives under the Yuki Edu umbrella. Now, Yuki, we do a lot in the education space, and we're looking at supporting students across all ages, and bringing them together to foster the next generation of talent. To look at the initiatives that are under this umbrella, we have Ask About Games, which I'm sure you're all familiar with already. It's a parental advice platform. Digital Schoolhouse, which looks at inspiring educators and students with a computing curriculum. The Yuki Student Membership Scheme, which supports students at undergraduate level, and then running adjacent to those from sort of, because they support primary to graduation, but running in adjacent to those is the intergames.org and the Video Games Ambassadors Programme, which do a lot of work around providing careers advice to students and schools. So really sort of working together to turn today's players into tomorrow's creators, so to speak, and continuing the support for the journey that those young people can take as they start their career. Because that's what this is about, really, isn't it? It's our industry. We are a world-leading industry. I'm sort of proud to sort of work within it. And, you know, we have such a diverse audience of the people that play the games that our industry makes. And we have got their stories to tell. And that's why diversity is so important, because in order to tell those stories and to be relevant, we do need to be more diverse and to ensure that we're representing that within our workforce to tell their stories better, because there are gaps. There's the well-known digital gap. There are shortages in key areas, in technical roles, be it artists or musicians, and people doing sound composition for games, or and 2020 has been a train crash of a year, potentially, some people might say, an insane year, and it's brought its own factors. And then you bring sort of Brexit into account, and goodness knows what's going to happen. But I think all of these issues become even more important. We need to increase the number of job applications coming through. That's essentially what it comes down to. And the only way to increase the number of job applications coming through is to actually convince more people to apply to those roles to begin with. So we've got to do something different to what we've been doing before, and that's partly what this role takes. And we're hoping that the number of new applications are more diverse. But it is, why do we not have more people applying, and what are the issues? And I think I sort of just stretching back into my teaching days, really. And I know things are very different now. There's been a lot of amazing work from a number of organizations, into games, for example, doing some wonderful work. But I think if I go back to my days as a teacher, going back about 7 years, I'd be honest, I didn't have a clue what the opportunities were in the industry and what the pathways were coming into the industry, what the roles might be. There's a common stereotype that in order to work in the video games, in order to make a game, you've got to be a programmer. I know that's not true. We would have students coming up to us, a couple of students every so often, saying, I want to make games. What do I do for my qualifications next? And I didn't know whether to advise them to go and do a games design course or whether to do something else, because what was best considered. There was no guidance out there. We were a forward-thinking school. We were noted for being special, having the speciality in the team and the special expertise. We were leading the way with a lot of regards, but we didn't have the insight. And I think it's, to a certain extent, it's probably fair to say, if my team didn't know, then there's a lot of other schools that also didn't know and were unable to advise. So one of the advice I did used to give actually is go and do a computer science degree, choose modules that you find interesting and go make games on the side. And then hopefully that should get you to where you want to go. And when I joined Yuki, I was sort of keen to find out whether that advice is any good. And lots of people said actually it was pretty decent advice, not bad. So that was a relief. But I also then looked to see what we are doing as an industry in careers, and I found there's actually quite a lot happening, but you've just got to go to the right places. So you've got to go to the games industry events, so things like the expos and the conferences, and there's careers panels and talks and all sorts of things that happen there, but they're at those conferences and they're at those events. And if you're not going to those events, then you don't know that advice is available. And that's great. Providing advice in those places is exactly what we need to do, because you've got a captive audience there that are really interested in games to an extent that they would take out a Saturday and spend all day at this event. And so that you want to capture them and give them some advice about pathways within the industry. That's amazing. But in order to cover the gap, bridge that gap, what we really have to do is increase the number of applications coming through. We are not going to increase those applications coming through if these are the only people that we talk to. We've got to stretch wider. We've got to talk to other communities and speak to the students that wouldn't be seen dead at one of those events. To put it in, to put it differently, and just to think, those students that would never consider taking the time out to go to an event or anything like that, who may not bat an eyelid at potentially playing or making games. How do we reach those young people and convince them that career in the industry is a viable pathway? Because we do need to stretch the net wider. We do need to broaden this, because if we look at we're not that diverse as an industry. these are the results here from the 2020 diversity census that came out earlier this year. An incredible piece of work. But to summarize all of the percentages and the stats that you can see on screen, essentially our industry is predominantly made up of rich white men. Be it gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, we're not hugely diverse, and we've got to change that. And you could argue there's all sorts of discussions as to why that's the case. It is the tech industry. You've got to afford the tech, and that's the sort of, I guess, point I'll come back to. But there's things that we can do here, and the first step is making sure everybody has access to that education, because if we want a diverse workforce tomorrow, we have to be inclusive in school today. We're increasing the number of job applications. That means wanting to increase the number of people coming through who want to work in the industry. We've got to change their minds. And for that, we've got to hit young people at the places where they're learning. And so that's schools and colleges. And we have to be inclusive within schools and colleges in order for us to be able to have that diverse workforce that we want tomorrow. Because the thing is, if you aren't aware that this is a career opportunity for you, you're not going to aim towards it. I mean, this is a phrase that I've said several occasions, with the Digital Schoolhouse esports tournament. For me, the Digital Schoolhouse esports tournament, when we started it, esports is the medium through which we do it. But it's all, to be honest, it's all around careers education. It's not necessarily concerned about turning the 10,000 participants we had into professional esports players tomorrow, but it's more about opening that door to a world of opportunities that they hadn't considered before, showing them that there's something that they can enjoy and that they can turn it into a career. There is a pathway here. Other people are doing it. You can do it too. And here's the conversation to help you. So how do we do this? How do we be more inclusive? I've got a couple of suggestions. I think this is a lengthy, I guess, topic for discussion and debate, and there's lots of different factors. So there's no way I can cover all of this within the time I have. But there are a couple of bits that I have picked out on that I do want to focus the lens on a bit, and I do think we can do things here. I really believe that we can make a difference there. So the first element is financial inclusion. We know that there are children that can't afford the tech at home, and this is something that came to light even more so during the pandemic, when all of a sudden all these kids had to learn at home and schools were closed. We saw the news reports where you've got 4 children in one home having to do online remote learning through their parents' smartphone device, and they have a 90-minute slot or whatever it is to use that device to get all the things that they need. And those children were disadvantaged. We've just finished delivering a 3-week video game design course with Middlesex University as part of their summer success camp for disadvantaged children. And we had to do that completely unplugged, as in teaching video games design just using pen and paper, because we had to assume the only device they had was a smartphone, and they were using that to watch the live stream on YouTube. And so, these children have these disadvantages. They don't have those resources. They can't use them at home. They don't have those opportunities. But to a certain extent, you think, well, that was the problem with homeschooling. That's why school was so important, because they have access to this tech and they have access to these resources at school. But the truth and reality is that actually a lot of schools that are based in populations and regions where a large proportion of the population comes from a disadvantaged background are also underfunded and under-resourced. So you have a situation where the problem actually becomes more profound, because the students don't have the resource at home, and then they don't have it at school. And if they don't have it at school either, then when are they going to actually be able to use it? When are they going to learn that they can enjoy it and they might want a career in it? I mean, if they can't use the tech, will they create it tomorrow? So one option is to go unplugged, and that is, using, and Digital Schoolhouse has done a lot of work in this area. So that is, just to give you an idea of what that means, that's using resources that don't involve a device, but to teach computer science concepts and digital skills. So we've done this, and it is possible. You can do a lot. We've had a wonderful a stream of activities where we use dance or magic tricks or Lego puzzle pieces to teach computer science concepts, down to using pizza boxes to teach machine architecture, for example. And there's lots of benefits to this. It's a wonderful way to introduce quite abstract concepts. You make them quite concrete and very tangible, easy to manipulate. And it's doable. You can introduce the entire curriculum without using a computer at all, and that's brilliant. It works well for disadvantaged families and underfunded schools because, hey, you don't need that tech requirement. So there's a lot that you can do with it, but it's only part of the journey. It can only take you part of the way. If you're ever going to enter the tech industry, you can't get away without using the tech. At some point, you're going to have to go onto a machine, and at some point, you're going to have to develop your skills within that environment. Whether it's access to the Adobe Creative Suite or something like Unity or Unreal or a Construct, you need a decent PC that will run this for you, at least at mid-range. But the thing is, lots of schools, the PCs that they have are never high spec to begin with. They're quite low spec or mid range because they've got to buy, they've got to buy potentially 100 plus machines, and they've got a limited budget. So they're not going to buy the most powerful machines because they're too expensive. I've been in schools where primary school will maybe have half a dozen old PCs for the entire primary school, or they've completely ditched and gone for iPads. The school that I was in was quite affluent, and so I was running a machine that was about 3 years old and fairly decent specification. And when Microsoft released Kodu as an environment and I was really excited because I thought this is a great way to teach programming and games design. But in less than a term, we ditched it as a resource because the lag was so great, the software was unusable, and we were never able to do it. And you could argue, when actually the head teacher should be buying better machines. That's not fair. The head teachers need to understand that it's a digital world out there, and this is a priority, and this is important, and surely they should be putting more money into this. Well, they will if they have. Here's a dilemma. Consider this. So imagine you're a secondary school head teacher. You've suddenly got this little windfall, whatever the reasons might be. You've got an extra £50,000 to spend. What do you spend it on? No, we want them to spend it on PCs, but that won't be the only priority that they've got. They've got a number of things. They've got a teacher shortage in their school. They're understaffed. So do they recruit an experienced teacher, or do they recruit 2 newly qualified teachers? And actually, if it's a school inside London, they won't be able to afford 2 newly qualified teachers at £50,000. It's not enough. So maybe a couple of part-time teachers, or they could improve the environment that the children are learning in and make it a better place to be. Replace the ripped carpets, repaint the walls, repair the cracks in the walls that make it look like the building's about to fall down, or stop that leak and replace that window, or whatever it is. Or you could take your machines that are at 6 years old, they still work, but they just need an upgrade because your teachers are constantly complaining. It takes them at least 10 minutes to log on, let alone start any new software. What do you do? Well, I don't know what a head teacher would do, but I do know that out of those 4 choices, the least likely option is upgrading a computer that still works, because in a head teacher's perspective, it's still working and you're still teaching and you can carry on teaching. So I want to use this opportunity and to really put a plea out there for all of you, and to say, can you, instead of recycling your machines, can you donate them instead, please? So industry, as I've discovered when I joined Yuki, and I've learned, we're creating technology for tomorrow. So we've got the machines we use in our offices and studios has got to be the latest tech, which means we're constantly upgrading. So I believe it's a cycle of about every 3 years. It might be different for some organizations, but I believe that's about the average. And every time you're upgrading to another high-spec PC. if a school is running a computer that's 5 years old, you're in a good position. And as we know, it was never a high spec to begin with. When I was doing the Digital Schoolhouse esports tournament and we were running the Overwatch game on PC, we polled our schools to see how many of them had a machine, a high enough specification to run Overwatch. It turns out half of them didn't. They just didn't have the minimum specification for the game. And so they were unable to take part. Well, that was unacceptable for me. I couldn't have schools not taking part because they just didn't have the funding and the resources to do so. So what I did instead was I begged and borrowed from industry and asked industry to donate. And I said, look, instead of recycling, could you donate to our schools instead? And we were able, all of those schools, every single one of those schools, thanks to industry support, was able to take part in the tournament. And it's pretty damn amazing, to be honest. And it, you know, some of the letters and thank you emails we received was incredible because, you know, a huge shout out to, you know, organizations like Sega and Creative Assembly that supported us in this, because these were their old machines that were being sent for recycling. And instead of doing that, they sent them to our schools. And the thank you letters from our schools were saying that it's the most powerful machine that school now received. And it unlocked the opportunity to not just take part in the tournament, but to also unleash a whole raft of new lessons. They were talking about now being able to use the Adobe suite, or the, you know, being able to, you know, do graphic editing, video editing, to be able to bring on Unity and actually use that for their BTEC creative media courses. You know, there's a huge digital divide here in this country, and we're aware of that. And you know, some of it's quite systemic change that is going to take longer to do. But at the small level, what we can do, each individual one of us as an organization, as a company, can look at the machines that we're about to send to recycling and actually see if there's a needy school within the local community or a family that we could donate it to instead. If you don't have that, if you find that a challenge and you don't know, then Yuki is here to help. And I you know, just drop me an email. We have the networks, we have access to schools and families, and we can help you out if you are able to do that. So that's sort of financial inclusion. And then, you know, neurodiversity, and sort of moving on to this, you know, and the industry reckons thinking differently is good, right? You know, we recognize that, you know, there's wonderful people who, you know, when you think differently, you can come up with the most amazing innovations, and that's fantastic. But when you're in school, sometimes we end up, I call it unconscious bias. You can find that you limit opportunities for people because in schools, there is this premise that potentially computer science is only for the smart kids. So I've seen schools, and I've worked in schools with schools that they offer GCSE computing, but it's only for those kids that are predicted an A and B in maths, or it's only for those kids that are doing triple science. It's only for those kids that are doing this, you know, and it's not open to everybody else. And you will have students, for example, who would just about manage a single science and want to study computing, and for them it's not an option. And maybe the school offers a BTEC for them to do instead, maybe not. It depends on their staffing. But it's not just around subject choices. Actually, this stretches wider. One example that comes to my mind is when I was teaching years ago, when I was teaching a year 7 class. So my school grouped tutor groups by ability. So on the one hand, you had the extension band kids with the most amount of gifted and talented children in there, right to the other end where you had the support band, which had the most number of statemented children in there with special needs. And I insisted on teaching everybody. And I remember we were getting to the unit where we were introducing, well, I say machine architecture, actually it was introducing the concept of input, process, output, and what process meant in a bit more detail, and introducing binary representation. And I was mulling over in the school staff room how on earth I was going to teach the support band this unit. And the advice that was given to me by many well-meaning colleagues was, why are you even trying? Just get them to copy something out. It's fine. They'll work. It will work. Like as long as they're not hitting each other and throwing chairs across the room. No one's going to bat an eyelid. No one's going to question what you've taught them or what they've got, because they don't get it anyway. They're not going to get it. Why are you even bothering, and why are you even struggling? And to be honest, the more they kept giving me this advice, the more horrified I was. Like, so what? I shouldn't even try to teach them? I just thought, no, that's wrong, because maybe I just need to teach differently. So I did. I used a role-playing game. We used magic tricks to introduce that concept, and they got it. By the end of the second lesson, they were converting from binary to denary using a spreadsheet, and it was incredible. It was absolutely amazing. You know, lots of children on a good day will forget 50% of what you've taught them next week, and that's why you need to reinforce it. So with statemented children, potentially that percentage is going to be much higher. But what they forget about the next lesson. But for the rest of the year, there were two things those kids never forgot. One was what the word process meant in relation to computing. And second was the magic trick I taught them, which illustrated binary and how to explain that. And it gave them such amazing self-esteem to be able to go and repeat that magic trick at home with family and friends and explain the rationale behind it. It worked. I believe computer science is for everyone. It absolutely, definitely is. It's possible. You've just got to change the way you do it. You know, and this is, I'd like to think it's potentially a bit of unconscious bias, but it happens all the time. You know, year after year after year, when we see this, you know, it's a pattern. And again, this is potentially more systemic change that needs to happen. But the extension bands with the most able kids were dominated by people from upper middle class backgrounds. You know, the Black and minority ethnic communities dominated the lower ability bands. They were also the ones from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. It is not a fluke. It is not random. You know, and what it creates is this division that they see amongst themselves. It's like, I remember this discussion at a management meeting where someone went into a debate head to head against the head of English, because it was saying, well, you know, about whether or not the lower ability group should be taught Shakespeare. You know, just because we assume they're not going to get it, so why teach them? But doing that means that we're siloing them off from a wealth of opportunities. So there's things like careers opportunities and careers talks, maybe a studio visit that schools will select the gifted and talented group, or the people that are, you know, flagged as this thing. And if you're never entering any of those categories, you're not going to go. You're the forgotten middle, if anything. And, you know, they will self-select. They will say, this is not for me. And it broke my heart when I was talking to a group about this wonderful opportunity that was coming up in the subsequent week, and asking them how many of them do it. And the kids looked at me like I'd gone nuts. Why was I even asking them? They're like, come on, miss. I was like, no, I don't understand what. And they were like, no, come on, miss. You know, that's for the extension band. That type of stuff. It's not for us. It absolutely is for them. If anything, it's for them more than it is for anybody else. But this is where I think we sit as an industry can make a huge difference, because video games are the one unique thing that engage all students across the board, regardless of what diversity category you put them in, equally. It's amazing. And I knew this before I entered Yuki. Before I entered Yuki, I didn't know the stats, I didn't know the figures, I didn't know the research. I'll be totally honest. I hadn't got a clue what the percentages were. But what I did know was, year after year, class after class, every single time, if you ever asked a kid about playing games or wanting to make a game, it was the one activity that got everybody excited, regardless of who they were. You know, and we know since then, you know, there's data and things to back this up, and it really, you know, we have a power at our fingertips, and we more of it. There is more recent research that was released this summer from the National Literacy Trust that looks at video games being able to improve literacy amongst students that are potentially more resistant. It's have a look at it if you want to know about that in more detail. But there is something that we can do, whether it's through promoting through our own platforms. Games bring people together. And as an industry, can we ask ourselves, are we making the most of that for these purposes, for the purposes of diversity, for the purposes of education, for the purposes of equal opportunities for everybody? I've mentioned the DSH esports tournament a few times, but one of the things that's been consistently reported time and again by all of the head teachers and school leaders that we speak to, is that it is the club with the most diverse representation in their school. And it's phenomenal, and they're flabbergasted at it, and it's why they come back. And you'll have a school which will have queues snaking around the corridors, and 300 kids wanting to take part in this activity. We need more of this. DSH Esports is the one that we do, but we as Yuki, yes, we as Yuki need to run more of these, but actually we as an industry need to do more of this. We need to do more of this stuff, and we need to find new and creative and engaging ways of doing this. We've got some of the most creative minds in the business. Surely if we pull together, we can find some wonderful ways of reaching these children equally, regardless of, and getting past that barrier where they see this is not for me. We know there's research out there that's saying girls that play video games are 3 times more likely to enter a STEM career. Again, are we making the most of that? Can calling out to the publishers and the developers and the hardware, you have a huge following on social media, and we know the kids are on social media. Can you use your platform a little more to talk about this? Maybe you can. It'd be great. As an industry, so what can we do, and how can we? I've got a few suggestions, and like I said, this is not substantive, but this is just a few suggestions where we might begin. Let's speak to communities we haven't before. I think a lot of these communities potentially are playing your games, but what about those kids that aren't playing games? Again, those are the kids that can't afford to play games. A brand new game costs about, what, £60 on average, maybe? That's a lot of money. There's a lot of kids that can't afford that. Can we make games more affordable? Can we reach communities that we haven't before? Can we not just limit careers advice to the expos and the conferences? Can we stretch out to other mechanics? It isn't just about computer science. There is that common myth, I need to be a programmer to go and make games. Well, that's not true. Do the art teachers know that the games industry is a viable pathway for artists, or do the music teachers know that? Because if they don't, they're not going to be telling their kids. And the children get advice from their teachers. That's the first place where they go to. So we need to reach these people. We need to reach these schools, and we need to share that advice. But this is potentially sort of longer term stuff. What can you do? How can you help tomorrow? Again, I've said this before, donate your old tech. And if you don't know if a local school or a family, and you've got tech that you can and are willing to donate, then we're willing to kind of step in and try and help plug that gap. So we have the networks and we can make those communications. So please do feel free to drop me a line. We've got the Video Games Ambassadors Network. You've become a VGA. Join the network, support schools. Schools post opportunities. We're working with the Careers and Enterprise Company, with the VGAs, and their careers advisors are promoting the VGA network as a place where schools can secure industry insights. And that could be any number of things. You might be judging a competition. You might deliver a careers talk. You could be doing some mentoring. It really can vary. But please do consider becoming a VGA. We've got the 1 minute mentor videos. These are 60-second videos where you just talk a little bit about what you do and some advice for future talent. And we promote that. So consider please submitting a 1 minute mentor video. It takes 60 seconds to record. Just send it over, or even promote it. You have amazing channels and the number of people following you. Potentially, if this is something that you could promote amongst your audience, and we can get people thinking about that as a viable option. And I guess that's me, and it's just over to, if we have time, just to hand over to questions.
Yeah, we do. We have time, and there's a bit of a lively chat going on in the YouTube chat, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer some of these questions actually, Shahneila, but we'll give them a go.
Okay.
We have a Pokang. I don't know. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to get into the games industry but cannot only private paid expenses in the country that lead there? And they say later on, in France at least, we don't have a choice but to study and pass advanced maths before getting into an actual IT degree. I'm not sure if that's your expertise, but that's his question, their question.
So I think, you know, we've got there's certain thing, isn't there, with universities and their entrance requirements and all sorts of things about you having to follow. If you don't see yourself great at maths, then you can't do a computer science degree potentially in a lot of red brick universities without having done A-level maths at least. And for some people, like myself, I didn't like maths. And so I felt I was unable to do a computer science degree, and I've actually had a bit of a roundabout route, which I won't go into now, but into this. But the truth is, I think from what I've learned, it's about, from what I've spoken to people within the industry, it's about talent. If you can find a way to showcase your talent, they'll consider you. And it's about networking and talking, but it's about building your portfolio, and it's about practicing what if you enjoy making games, make games. If you love doing art, do art, and do more of it, build a portfolio, publish it somewhere. And regardless of then what you do in terms of your education pathway, if you can go into an organization or a company or a studio, ultimately show them your skill level and show them your talent and show them your passion, I believe a lot of companies will consider you. I don't know if that helps and answers the question totally.
I think it's we also have Inspector Geek. Inspector Geek works in the games industry, but has been wanting their wife to get a position, but she doesn't feel like it's an inclusive industry. Would you share any guidance for a mature woman getting into this business?
I hope that we a mature woman getting into this business again. I think job hunting at this point is we're a statistical climate all around. But my best advice would be speaking to organisations like Women in Games, who are fantastic. There's a lot of work there, and there's a lot of advice from women and people working in that and pathways. So that would be my first piece of advice, actually, is getting in touch with an organisation like Women in Games as a way forward for the people, advice around recruiters and things. And we do have the Raise the Game pledge around diversity and EDI at UKI as well. And hopefully there's a lot of work happening. So hopefully, there's a lot of work and a lot of people kind of pledging to sort of make a difference and improve and sort of try and remove the unconscious bias that can sometimes hit recruitment. So hopefully there'll be a shift. But in terms of a direct action, as a piece of advice for someone looking to get into the industry, speak to and find out what Women in Games are doing.
Hopefully that answers your question, Inspector Geek. There's a few conversations here about the role that potentially sort of desktop access, I guess cloud computing might be able to help in improving the technology available to school. I don't know if you have any views on that, but it's not really a question, but there's a few in the chat discussing that.
I think it could. I think with technology in schools, I think there's as I said, there's multiple factors, isn't there? So there's using cloud technology, but it's understanding it's schools being able to make that sensible decision, is like, what do I want to do and what do I want to achieve, and what is the tech that will help me to do it, and then using it in the right way, because you're right, there's a lot of cloud computing that can help, but it's about schools having the right knowledge and expertise and awareness and making the most of that. You can have a piece of tech. A school, it seems insane, but I know schools, for example, it's similar, but I know of schools, for example, that have spent £100,000 buying iPads for every kid or an entire year group. But when you ask them about, okay, what's the amazing stuff you're going to do with these iPads, and you don't necessarily have wonderfully concrete answers. It's maybe about doing a bit of internet research while you're in the lesson, or you've got your ebooks and things like that. But actually, the technology itself is it unleashes so much potential. There isn't always that forward thinking, and sometimes that's to do with expertise and understanding. But that's potentially not that's something for other organisations to have a look at, rather than industry, getting to the video games industry itself.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Mhm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, it's fine.
I think we've got time for one more question. We do have another. We have a panel after this on diversity and inclusion with practical tips for studios, which UK's Dr. Joe Twist is hosting. So I'm going to stay around for that and ask some more questions. Then there'll be another chance to get those questions. But we've got a question here from Anna L. I've watched a lot of talks on the topic of supporting diversity, and there is a focus on outreach, but not companies opening their doors to people with alternative experiences. Oh, sorry, that wasn't the question. The question was, do you have any thoughts on what happens to education? Encouraging more into the games industry is great, but when there is a lack of entry-level positions, it seems like a false promise of a career.
Yes, but hopefully, as industry is expanding, hopefully we are going to be able to open up more job opportunities and entry-level positions. I think there is, you're right, there's an additional conversation to be had with industry. Maybe we can think differently. And I think this is, again, part of the longer-term change that I think we as an industry can ask ourselves, can we make more of these options available? Whether it's, especially given today's climate, where so many young people have lost so many jobs, that's been on the news. Are there positions that we can, even temporary positions that we can open up? It is a bit of a conundrum if you've got more people, but I think people can come through at different stages and phases of their career as well.
Okay. Well, brilliant. Hopefully that answers everyone's questions. Thank you, Shahneila. That was brilliant. We are going to be doing some stories on GamesIndustry.biz about this. If you do have some old computers, donate them. Go on. Don't recycle, donate. We're going to be back in just over 15 minutes with a special panel on the very subject of diversity and inclusivity, including practical steps that businesses can take to improve it. And that's with UK's Dr. Joe Twist and a host of experts on the topic of part of UK's rating initiative. You can watch that on live.gamesindustry.biz or via our YouTube channel. In fact, there should be a link right now in the YouTube chat. If there isn't, somebody shout at me. Yeah, so do click on that. We'll see you in a few moments. Thank you very much.